Hello everyone, Lisa with Lisa Capen Quilts here. Today I am making a quilt label for my latest quilt that I made using my jelly plate. So I'm really excited. I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I plan on making this quilt label because I have a playlist on my channel. And each time I do a different kind of quilt label, I add a new video. So it's really fun if you're searching for different ways to label your quilts. Make sure to check out the playlist in the description box below. So for this quilt label, I thought I would make a little saying and just add this to my quilt label. And of course it has my name and the date, a little bit of information about the history of this quilt, and I've titled this quilt Embracing Forgotten Gifts. This was a bit of a challenge that I posted on the Creative Crew group on Facebook last week, and so that is what this quilt is all about. So for this quilt label idea, it is very, very simple. You could design your own embroidery. I designed this in Embrilliance Stitch Artist Level 2, and just typed in what I wanted the quilt label to say and spaced it out. And then it gave me an option to print this out, giving me some reference marks to center it up. For this quilt label, I have a 6.5 by 6.5 inch square piece of fabric. I have fused onto the back some very lightweight Pelon P44F fusible interfacing. It is very, very light. However, it will give this quilt label a little bit of body, because what I want to do is I want to take this square and fold it into a triangle, just like you see here. And at this top of the triangle will have a finished edge, just like that. We are going to embroider the information for our quilt label in this section, and then sew these sides into our binding. So I'll show you that as we go along. Right now I'm just getting ready to hoop my piece of fabric, and I'm going to make some center lines so that I can match everything up and start stitching. So let me go ahead and get ready to do that. Using a heat erasing pen, I'm just going to give myself some reference marks, the center of my triangle, so that I can line up my graphics within my fabric triangle that we are creating. Then I'll bring in my embroidery hoop, and with the marks that we made on our fabric and a washable school glue stick, I'm going to apply some glue to my fabric and use those reference marks to center my fabric square inside my hoop. I will be drying that glue with an iron, so we're not bringing any wet glue over to the embroidery machine. I'll use a couple pieces of painter's tape just to make sure that that fabric's nice and secure. I have a piece of cutaway stabilizer underneath my fabric, and a piece of lightweight tearaway stabilizer that's folded in half, so it's doubled up, and we're ready to go ahead and stitch out our embroidery. You could do hand embroidery, you could write with fabric markers, all different kinds of ways that you can label sentiments onto your quilt label. So here we are after the embroidery work is done. Jelly plate experiment. Quilt made by Lisa Capen, October 2019, Embracing Forgotten Gifts. So now I can go ahead and take this off from the hoop. I'll just bring you along for that part of the process, and I'll show you what I do next. I'm going to start by removing the painter's tape, and then we can pull away the tearaway stabilizer from the back side. I'm going to go ahead and remove the cutaway from the hoop, and now we can start taking away all of the extra bits of tearaway from all of our letters. Sometimes when you have really small fonts, just leave some of those extra bits in there. It's not going to hurt anything. Once you've removed the tearaway stabilizer, We'll just get rid of all those little bits laying around. We can go ahead and trim away our cutaway, which will actually remain in our fabric label. But we're just going to trim it up a little bit. Now I am just going to take some Fabri-Tac glue, and I am going to just put a little bit of glue here and there. That's going to permanently tack down our square into a triangle. Just like that. Doesn't have to be a lot, just enough to really fuse those two pieces together. And now, see if you can see that. We're just going to match up our edges into our triangle shape. Just like that. Apply a little bit of pressure. And we're going to let that dry. I did not put any glue near the edges, although if you did, it would be okay as long as you let it dry before sewing this into your quilt. So I'm going to let this dry about 15 minutes, and then we're going to add this to the back side of our quilt. Now that my glue is dry within my label, I have my quilt all squared up and ready for a binding. So I'm just going to take some Elmer's glue wall. You can use Elmer's school glue. This does wash out of your quilt when you're all done, so I'm not worried about adding that to my quilt. What I'm going to do is just add a little bit of glue. Let's get this glue going. Right along the edge of this quilt. Just like that. We're going to bring in our quilt label and match up those edges just like this, and give that a good finger press into place. You could dry that with your iron if you wanted to speed things up, or you can just let it sit and dry all on its own. But either way, you want this to be dry before you bring it over to your sewing machine. Then you can most certainly sew right through the glue, and it won't cause any issues because it'll be dry. Now you could make your squares to start with at any size square that you wanted to. Just keep in mind that to finish this, you'll fold it directly in half, making a triangle shape. So you could make little ones, you could make bigger ones. This one, let's see, we started off at 6.5 inches for our square, and it is still 6.5 inches from this edge to this edge. And I think that that is a really nice size label. Now I'm going to go ahead and let that dry, and then I'm going to bind my quilt like I normally would. And because this is glued in place, I'm not worried about it moving around. You could also just pin this and forego the glue if you'd like. I have glue on my fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and bind my quilt, and we'll come back when it's all done. Moving over to the sewing machine, I'm just going to show you that we sew on our binding exactly as we normally would, but at the same time we are sewing in our quilt label. So whether you add your binding to the front side of your quilt first or to the back side like I'm doing, you would just bind your quilt like normal. And because we've used the glue and glue basted that fabric label into the edges, it's not going to shift or move anywhere. So we just bind our quilt like normal. I'm going to finish adding the binding, and then we're going to take a look. So here's my binding added to the back side, and now we're going to flip it over and finish our binding by sewing everything down on the front of the quilt. But this is how it'll look. This is a little preview of our quilt label. I think that's going to be so adorable. So here we have it. Here's the front of the quilt. And the binding was brought over to the front and just sewn down all the way around. And here is our quilt label. So I think that is the perfect and really easy and simple quilt label. You could even stuff little treats or little notes into this little pocket that it creates if you're giving your quilt as a gift. So it gives a really nice finished edge, very professional looking, and very simple. So I hope you add this to your toolbox of quilt label designs, and I hope that this was really helpful. If you'd love to share your quilt label ideas, you can jump down to the comments section. We'd love to hear from you, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask down there also. Don't forget, you can join us over at the Creative Crew. We do all kinds of creative genres of crafting and sewing and embroidery, all kinds of stuff. And we'd love for you to join us over there and share your work. Okay, I'm going to go hang this up in my sunroom. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll see you all really soon. Bye.